Hi there. So, this week in People and Places in the Community, I wanted to talk about inventors. Inventors have certainly made a big difference in our community, haven't they? And they have really made a big difference in changing our lives, haven't they? And so we wanted to look at one particular inventor today. But before we do, I just wanted to think about how inventors work and what they oftentimes do. And so the example that I wanted to show you was one that I think you're very familiar with, and that is this. So we look at this little tiny light bulb here, which is kind of reminiscent. It means it kind of makes us think a little bit about the first light bulbs that Edison invented. And you know the story about how it took him hundreds and hundreds of tries to figure out what this little tiny filament would work without burning up or exploding so that it would light up and we could use it. And when we think about how much that has changed our lives so that we could see when the sun goes down, that's really quite remarkable, isn't it? How much that has really transformed our lives. And then we think about the fact that somebody might have said to themselves, this is a lovely idea, but you can just screw it into one place and put it in like a lamp, and it only shines light in one place. But what about if we want to change that a little bit? And what about if we put it in a strand of something and put it in a string of lights like this? They do get tangled, don't they? That's the problem. And so you recognize these, don't you? Yes, these are the lights that we love to put up at Christmas time, don't we? And these lights go in a little bit differently because you just push them in. You don't even need to screw them in, you just push them in. And so these lights are a little bit different than the first lights, and they can even be colored lights, which is even fun too. And then I noticed that just even in the last couple years, somebody else came along and they said, yes, that's a very great idea, but I can even think of something different. And they came up with, I think they call them fairy lights. And oh, I love these fairy lights. And I don't know if you've noticed them before, but I have put them in this. And notice the fairy lights here. They are made just out of wire. And do you see that's just a little copper wire? It's very, very thin, isn't it? I don't know if you can see that up close or not, if I just hold that there. But it's a very, very thin wire. See how thin that is? And it's just a string of very, very thin wire with these little tiny, tiny bulbs on it. I think most of you have probably seen these in real life. And in addition to that being a really interesting invention, we also have what makes it glow, and that is a different type of electricity, and that's these batteries. So batteries are also an invention that someone came up with. And these are not just any kind of battery. These batteries are rechargeable batteries. And so instead of just using them up and then throwing them away, these batteries are rather interesting because what you do is you take them and you put them in this thing. And these are, you just seat them in these little slots here. And then this is kind of cool. You plug it into the wall like that, and then you let it charge for a while. That means the electricity from the wall goes back into the battery. And then after a while, I let it sit overnight. Then I can plug it back in again and use it for my my mouse, for this, I use rechargeable batteries for that, or I can use it for my little fairy lights. Anything that I might use batteries for. So that's another type of invention, isn't it? So today I'm going to read you a story that is about a very useful invention, that somebody came up with, and I'm not going to spoil it by even reading the title to you because I think it will be more fun if we just start the book and then you figure out what it is. And I like the way the book is written, and it has some humor to it. So let me put my fairy lights down here. And then we'll share the screen. And I hope that you enjoy this story as much as I do. Get to the first page here. All righty, here we go. Once upon a time, in 1917 actually, a cotton buyer named Earl Dixon married his beloved Josephine, and they lived happily ever after. The end. It's a very short story, wasn't it? Actually, that was just the beginning. The newlyweds expected to live in a quiet street in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Instead, Earl and Josephine ended up changing the world, one boo-boo at a time. You know what a boo-boo is? That's when you hurt yourself. You get banged or scraped up or cut yourself. A lot of times people say, oh, you got a boo-boo. You see, Josephine was accident prone. She often bumped and bruised herself while working around the house, but that was nothing compared to how often she injured herself in the kitchen. See her there in the kitchen? Ouch! She sliced and diced an onion, and sometimes she sliced her finger too. Boo-hoo! When she grated cheese, and sometimes she grated her knuckle instead. Arrgh! When she lifted a hot pot off the stove, she sometimes burned her hand. She has one of those pots that's metal up here and it's not protected. You know, it's not like rubber on here. And so you have to be very careful because when this part of the pot gets hot, the heat goes right up to the handle too. So you have to make sure you grab it with like a pot holder. After Josephine winced in pain, she quickly grabbed a rag to stop the bleeding. But with bulky towels between her fingers, it was even harder for Josephine to hold a knife. She became even more accident prone. Impossible, you say? It's true. Josephine's klutziness had become a bloody problem. Every night when Earl came home from work, he looked forward to talking with Josephine and eating the wonderful meal she had prepared. That was until he saw his beloved hands, his beloved's hands. Yikes! Her cuts might get infected. He had to help his new bride. Earl's father was a doctor, so Earl knew a little bit about boo-boos and bandages. And luckily, he worked for a company that manufactured hospital supplies. Earl knew there had to be a solution. But what was it? Earl thought while he shaved in the morning. Maybe I could. Earl thought about it while he bought cotton in the afternoon. Then I could. And Earl thought about it some more while he lay in bed at night. And that would solve. Then a light bulb went off in his brain. I've got it, Earl yelled with excitement, waking up Josephine. What have you got? She asked. I've got the bloody solution, of course. The next step was trying out Earl's idea. Step 1. He took a long piece of adhesive tape and laid it on the kitchen table, sticky side up. Step 2. Earl cut small squares of sterile gauze and stuck them on the tape every few inches. There it is. Step 3, he placed a material called crinoline on top of the adhesive tape to keep the whole strip sterile. It's perfect, Earl said proudly. Now all Josephine had to do was cut a piece a little longer strip of the little longer strip and put it on. She didn't need anybody's help. She needed only one hand and it worked. At last, they lived happily ever after. The end. But wait, I guess it's not the end, is it? But wait, here comes the part about how Earl and Josephine changed the whole world. Earl guessed there were probably hundreds, possibly even thousands of people who could benefit from his new invention. Earl and Josephine thought about making the bandages themselves, but soon they realized it was too big a job. Earl told one of his coworkers about it, and the coworker encouraged Earl to meet with the company's president. At first, Earl's boss, James Johnson, wasn't quite sure Earl's idea was good enough. Earl demonstrated how easy it was to put the bandage on. Then Mr. Johnson saw his own light bulb. The company agreed to produce and sell the product. They combined the words bandage and first aid to come up with the clever name of Band-Aid. So that's how we got the name Band-Aid. Pretty clever. Now Earl and Josephine would surely live happily ever after because Band-Aids were guaranteed to be an instant hit. And with that, we have come to the end. Thank you and good night. You think it's the end? Oops, not yet. Sorry. That first year, Band-Aids were made in a factory. It was a slower than slow process, and only a small number could be manufactured by hand. They came rolled up and were 18 ridiculous inches long and 3 ridiculous inches wide. That is a huge Band-Aid wide. And they still had to be cut into pieces. Earl, Josephine, and Mr. Johnson had high expectations, but the Band-Aid boxes collected dust and were ignored and unwanted. A few years later, the company invented a machine that could mass produce thousands of Band-Aids instead of the user having to cut them up. Each one was a ready-to-go Band-Aid. Band-Aids were now about 3 inches long and an inch wide. That's the size that we buy them in now, isn't it? And they were cute too. Each one had a little red string to pull in order to open the paper wrapper. I remember those. They had just the kind of wrapper that you have now, but to get it open, you had this little red string that you would pull and would go around the top and kind of open it up. And it was very cute and kind of fun to pull. And then that would open it up and you would be able to get the Band-Aid out. Success! Band-Aids flew off the shelves. The end. Nope. Not really. Unfortunately, even with the cute red string and the convenient size, the public wasn't sold on the idea. Mr. Johnson knew that there had to be a solution. What happened next was truly a stroke of genius. Who do you suppose these people are? They're hauling wood and fishing and bugling and chopping wood and pioneering and archery and bug catching, bird watching, building things with bricks, geology. Oh, they look like a particular group I know about. Let's see if you guessed right. The company decided to give Band-Aids away, kind of like advertising. Johnson wondered who needed self-adhesive bandages the most. And then that light bulb went off again. The Boy Scouts, of course. Is that who you guessed these guys were? All those fall down, climb up, scratched elbows, scraped knees, boys got plenty of cuts. It didn't take long before the mothers of those rough and tumble boys saw the handy little bandages were great. That did it. Earl and Josephine's invention was a smash. During World War II, the company sent millions of free bandages to the brave soldiers fighting overseas. In a few years that followed, Band-Aids were made up of different sizes, colors, and designs. Some even had pictures of cartoon characters on them. And that continues to this day all over the world. What kinds of Band-Aids have you had, and what kinds of designs have you had? I bought Band-Aids for my kids that had cartoon characters, and some of them were Marvel characters that they absolutely loved. And so I would love to know, if you want to put it in the comment box, what kinds of Band-Aid designs have you had that you really enjoyed? I think it's great that Band-Aids does that and makes them. Sometimes they're just fun designs like flowers or just fun pictures on them that are not really characters, but they are really colorful and neon colors and sometimes designs that are really pretty. So maybe in the chat box or the discussion page down below this reading of the book, you'd like to put down what kind of Band-Aids you have bought that you really liked the designs of them. That would be fun to see. From the boisterous hot dog vendors in Brooklyn, fancy French winemakers, tired taxi drivers in Denmark, and English bobbies on bicycles, to daredevil skateboarders in Saskatchewan, king crab fishermen in Alaska, sweaty Ugandan soccer players, and applauding audiences at the Bolshoi Ballet Theater in Moscow, the sounds of whoa, ouch, echo still, but not for long. Because soon those snivels and sobs of pain are silenced by Earl and Josephine's accidental boo-boo invention. And that is the happiest ending of all. The end, really. So I do have another couple things that are interesting that I wanted to share with you about Earl and Josephine. Earl passed away in 1961. Unfortunately, he did not see all of the really cool designs and fun artwork and colors that Band-Aid came out with, that Johnson & Johnson came out with. But he certainly did see the popularity that Band-Aids has of the invention that he came up with. And Band-Aid still is that brand is still the king of all bandages. It outsells all other kinds of bandages that are like that. The other thing that's interesting is that the company that invented the Band-Aid, Mr. Johnson, that he went to, is the founder of the company Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson is one of the three recognized companies currently that the United States has approved for COVID-19 vaccines. There's Pfizer is one of the companies, Moderna is the other company, and Johnson and Johnson is the third company that the United States has approved as a vaccine that you can get for COVID-19. So we still have a connection here with a company that invented Band-Aids, and now they're working on inventing COVID-19 vaccines. So that's kind of a fun fact too, isn't it, of a connection there. And then the last fun fact that I wanted to share with you about the Band-Aid today is that last year in 2020, the year 2020, was the 100th anniversary of the invention of the Band-Aid. Think of that, 100 years. So if you need to put on a Band-Aid this year, just think, oh my goodness, last year was the 100th anniversary of the Band-Aid. So we're in the 101 year of having Band-Aids. And aren't we thankful for that? So we're grateful for all the inventors that are out there and how they have changed our lives and how people keep thinking about, well, what if, and what about this? And how about if I do this? And isn't it amazing about the people that are creative and that have changed our lives for the better? So I hope that you have a great week this week and that next week, we will be back at our usual time for our last class. That's so hard to believe that it will be our last class next week. And it will be at our regular time, and hopefully we won't have any problems with technology. And we will see you at Thursday in our regular classroom. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next week. Have a great week. Bye.